close your eyes for a moment. Allow yourself to be transported, not just in time, but into the very soul of a city that, in 1860, was a living paradox. Imagine yourself in Charleston, South Carolina, where the salty Atlantic air mingled with the intoxicating scent of jasmine and magnolias, and the golden late afternoon sun kissed the facades of colonial homes that seemed to have been sculpted by elegance itself. The meticulously clean cobblestone streets bustled with a life that was, at once, vibrant and rigidly stratified. Carriages pulled by gleaming horses glided smoothly, carrying ladies in their adorned hats and gentlemen in impeccable attire, all immersed in a murmur of conversations that seemed to dance in the air. Before your eyes, the city reveals itself at its peak. The harbor, a mosaic of masts and sails, where ships of all flags, majestic sailing vessels and the newly arrived steamers, docked and departed, laden with the wealth that sustained an entire empire. Charleston's architecture was, in itself, a work of art, colorful houses with their ornate verandas, known as piazzas, inviting contemplation and the sea breeze. Every detail, from the wrought iron gates guarding lush gardens to the intricate woodwork of the facades, spoke of a prosperity that seemed unshakable, of a future that, for many, shone with a golden promise. The squares were green oases, punctuated by statues and fountains, where society met for evening strolls, exchanging smiles and greetings, oblivious, or perhaps deliberately blind, to the storm brewing on the horizon. But what happens when such beauty is shattered? When hope turns to ashes? And how does a nation rise, brick by brick, from the ruins of its own war? Charleston, in 1860, was a cradle of culture, wealth, and unparalleled architectural beauty. Yet, beneath this veil of splendor, a storm was brewing. A storm of conflicting ideals, of social tensions, and of a brutal reality that would soon explode and change everything forever. Can you imagine the feeling of living in such a magnificent place, yet standing on the brink of an abyss that no one truly wanted to see? That chilling premonition that precedes catastrophe, even amidst the warmth of the sun and apparent joy. Charleston was not just a beautiful city, it was the pulsating heart of the South. Its strategic location on the Atlantic coast, with rivers and canals extending inland, made it a vital connection point, an artery through which life and wealth flowed. It was one of America's most important ports, the gateway for the wealth that sustained an entire economy based on large-scale agriculture. Cotton, white gold, flowed in torrents from its vast plantations to the ships that carried it to the textile mills of England and the North, transforming the city into a center of unquestionable power and influence. Before your eyes, you can almost participate in the grandeur of the commercial empire. You can see the towering bales of cotton on the docks, so high they resembled small white mountains. The warehouses, filled to the ceiling with goods from all over the world, exuded the scent of distant lands and exotic spices. The air was thick with the clamor of commerce, the shouts of merchants, the creaking of ropes, and the rhythmic chants of laborers. It was a place where fortunes were made, where the elite reveled in their traditions and lifestyle, believing themselves to be the guardians of a superior civilization. But what was the true cost of this prosperity? Who paid the price for such immense wealth? And how did this opulence become the fuse for the greatest tragedy in American history, igniting a conflict that would tear the nation apart? However, Charleston's beauty and wealth were built upon a dark foundation: slavery. Thousands of enslaved African and African American men, women, and children were the invisible force that drove this engine of prosperity. Their lives were of arduous labor, without freedom, without a voice, without recognition. The streets that seemed so vibrant now reveal the silent and constant presence of those who were property, not people. The opulence of the mansions hid the pain and suffering of those who maintained them. The grand plantations surrounding the city, which generated the cotton wealth, were places of unimaginable hardship and systemic cruelty. If the complexity of this history deeply moves you, please hit the *like button on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our journeys through time that reveal the truths behind the facts. Charleston was not just an economic hub, it was also the epicenter of secessionist political fervor. Here, the idea that Southern states had the right to secede from the Union, to protect their way of life, which included slavery, gained immense strength and voice. In 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln, a staunch abolitionist, was the final spark. South Carolina, led by Charleston, was the first state to declare its secession from the Union in December of that year. The intensity of these moments was palpable, the streets filled with people debating, newspapers spreading the news, the pervasive feeling that something monumental was about to happen. The air crackled with excitement and defiance, a sense of destiny unfolding. How did political rhetoric transform into such radical action? What were the arguments that pushed a nation to the brink of civil war? And how did Charleston's decision reverberate across the entire country, lighting the fuse of a bomb that would soon explode, plunging millions into conflict? Behind every political decision, every ship in the harbor, every brick in the mansions, there were lives. Real people, with hopes, fears, and dreams that were about to be crushed or transformed by the impending war. There was the wealthy planter, who feared losing his fortune, his status, and the very foundation of his existence, watching his world crumble. There was the society lady, who saw her world of privilege and social rituals threatened by a terrifying uncertainty, unsure if the balls and soirees would continue. There was the merchant, calculating the risks of an imminent war, worried about the future of his business and his family, as the flow of goods ground to a halt. And, most poignantly, there was the enslaved person, who dreamed of freedom but lived under the constant fear of violence and separation, unsure if the war would bring salvation or even greater oppression, an uncertainty that weighed on their every day. Before your eyes, you can almost look into the eyes of these people, feel their deepest hopes and fears. Each of them, unknowingly, was about to be swept into a conflict that would change their lives forever, in ways they could never predict. What would be the fate of each of them when war arrived? Freedom for some, ruin for others, and pain and mourning for almost all, regardless of their side or status. If you are feeling the depth of these stories, if they connect you with the humanity behind the grand events, please share this video with your friends and family. Help us carry these stories forward, so more people can learn and reflect on the complex paths of the past. And then, the boiling point. In Charleston Harbor, Fort Sumter, a federal stronghold, became the symbol of Union sovereignty. But for the secessionists, it was more than a fort, it was an affront, an unacceptable foreign presence in their newly declared independent territory. For the Union, on the other hand, it was a vital outpost, an irreducible symbol that the country was still united, despite declarations of secession. The situation was a powder keg, and Charleston held the match. Before your eyes, the escalating tension in the days leading up to the attack intensifies. Confederate cannons are strategically positioned around the bay, aimed directly at the fort, their dark muzzles promising destruction. Union ships try, in vain, to resupply the besieged troops, their attempts frustrated by enemy vigilance. With each passing day, the hope of a peaceful resolution dwindles, replaced by a grim and inevitable certainty. Charleston's population watches with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation, knowing that the nation's fate could be decided there, in their own backyard, with the first shot. What truly happened in the days leading up to the attack? What were the last desperate attempts to avoid the inevitable, the final appeals to reason before the madness of war took over? And how did a single shot, fired from Charleston, trigger the American Civil War, a conflict that would cost hundreds of thousands of lives and reshape the country forever, leaving an indelible mark on its soul? Charleston in 1860 was a city of stark contrasts, beauty and brutality, wealth and oppression, hope and despair. But this was merely the calm before the storm. In the coming minutes, we will witness how this magnificent city was dragged into the eye of the hurricane, how its days of glory were interrupted by a conflict that would transform it forever. Prepare for a deep dive into history. Stay with us until the end to discover how Charleston was destroyed, how it rose from the ashes, and the legacy the Civil War left on its landscape and in its soul. And tell me in the comments, what surprised you most about Charleston in 1860? Which aspect of this pre-war city did you find most fascinating or most shocking? Your opinion is crucial to us, and we want to know what resonated most with you on this journey through time. In 1860, life in Charleston for the elite was a spectacle of refinement and tradition, a world apart where etiquette and status dictated every movement, every word, every gesture. We transport ourselves inside these imposing mansions, whose grand facades, with their classical columns and elaborate verandas, concealed even more luxurious and meticulously decorated interiors. Opulent living rooms, adorned with dark wood European furniture and fine carvings, Persian rugs that muffled footsteps, and artworks gracing the walls, served as the stage for elegant dinners. At these banquets, fine Chinese porcelain and gleaming silver shimmered under the soft light of crystal chandeliers, while conversations, lively and erudite, revolved around politics, culture, literature, and, inevitably, the future of the South, always with a tone of self-confidence and an unwavering belief in the superiority of their way of life. The streets were a parade of elegance and distinction, a stage where society displayed itself. Ladies in their plumed hats and delicate parasols, shielding themselves from the southern sun, strolled with studied grace, their silk and fine cotton dresses rustling. Gentlemen in their impeccable linen coats and ebony canes exchanged formal greetings, discussing the day's business or the latest political news with an air of gravity. Children, meticulously dressed, played in tree-lined squares, under the watchful eye of their nannies, many of whom were enslaved, while the city's murmur echoed in the background, a soundtrack to the unfolding life. It was a world of complex social rituals, of grand balls that lasted until dawn, with orchestras playing waltzes and quadrilles, of literary soirees where poetry and prose were celebrated, and of gatherings that defined Southern high society, a universe where appearance, reputation, and lineage were everything. But how aware was this elite of the approaching storm, Fernando? Did they truly believe that their way of life, so intrinsically linked to slavery, could be preserved indefinitely, untouched by the forces of change sweeping the country? And how would the lives of these privileged individuals, so protected and comfortable, be irrevocably altered by the war, which would make no distinction between rich and poor, between masters and slaves, and which would tear down the pillars of their existence? Charleston's harbor was the true engine of the city, a melting pot of cultures and a vital link to the rest of the world. It was a place where the frantic energy of commerce pulsed every moment, from sunrise to sunset. Ships of all kinds, from majestic three-masted sailing vessels that crossed oceans, bringing and taking wealth, to the newly arrived steamers, with their smoking funnels and the sound of their steam engines, docked and departed, connecting the South to Europe, the Caribbean, and the North. Before your eyes, the scene is one of incessant movement, an orchestrated dance of labor and trade. Stevedores, many of them enslaved or free African-American laborers, with their tense muscles and sweaty faces, moved mountains of cotton bales, barrels of rum, crates of tea and coffee. Their bodies were the driving force that propelled the economy. Merchants, with their ledgers open and quill pens in hand, closed deals worth fortunes, the voices mingling with the harbor's clamor, the sound of waves, and the creaking of cranes. Sailors from all corners of the globe, in their exotic clothes and varied accents, brought with them stories of distant lands and news from the world, making the harbor a vibrant microcosm of the globalization of the era, a meeting point of cultures and ideas. It was a spectacle of colors, sounds, and smells that stimulated all the senses, the saltiness of the sea, the sweetness of molasses, the bitterness of coffee, the strong scent of tobacco, the aroma of unknown spices. The cacophony of voices, the creaking of ropes, the groaning of cranes, the sound of water against ship hulls, all this composed a unique symphony that celebrated the city's economic vitality, a testament to its importance on the world stage. The docks were a human anthill, where wealth was generated and life, in its multiple facets, manifested itself. How would this economic vitality, so essential for Charleston's survival and prestige, be affected by the approaching war? What would happen to the harbor when naval blockades began, strangling the flow of trade and isolating the city from the outside world? And how would the interruption of this flow of goods and people change the lives of everyone in Charleston, from the wealthy planter who depended on exports to the humblest stevedore who depended on daily labor, forever altering the economic and social landscape of the city and the entire region? But to understand Charleston in 1860 in its entirety, in its complexity and its profound contradictions, we must confront its darkest face, the uncomfortable and brutal truth that sustained all its prosperity, the slave market. It was a place where human beings were treated as commodities, bought and sold to sustain the cotton economy and the Southern way of life. Before your eyes, the scene unfolds with a chilling sobriety. We see individuals, men, women, and children, standing on auction blocks, their bodies inspected, their lives reduced to a price. Families were torn apart, destinies sealed, and human dignity denied in the most absolute terms. The atmosphere was heavy with despair, resignation, and the silent cries of injustice. It was a stark reminder of the brutal cost of the South's prosperity, a profound moral stain on the city's otherwise elegant facade. The refined architecture of the city contrasted dramatically with the cruelty that took place in its markets, a constant, unspoken tension. How could a society reconcile such beauty and refinement with such an inhumane practice? What was the psychological and social impact of this reality on everyone involved, from the enslaved to the slaveholders? And how would the war, which was rapidly approaching, promise a radical, albeit uncertain, change for those who lived under the yoke of slavery, offering a glimmer of hope for freedom amidst the impending chaos? Beyond the economic and political spheres, Charleston in 1860 was also a vibrant center of culture and social life, a place where art and entertainment flourished, at least for a segment of the population. Grand balls, with orchestras playing period melodies and couples twirling in waltzes and quadrilles, theatrical plays that brought drama and comedy from Europe and America, and literary soirees where poetry and prose were celebrated, filled the evenings of the elite. Religion played a central role in the city's life, with imposing churches, whose bells chimed in unison on Sundays, serving as meeting points and pillars of the community, where faith was cultivated and social bonds were strengthened. Before your eyes, the vibrancy of the festivities and the solemnity of the services blend into a complex panorama. We see ballrooms illuminated by candles and chandeliers, the sumptuous dresses of the ladies, the smiles and lively conversations, the apparent lightness of social life. In contrast, churches are filled with worshippers, their voices rising in hymns and prayers. However, even in these spaces of celebration and faith, racial segregation was an undeniable and deeply entrenched reality. Enslaved people and free blacks had their own pews in churches, often separated by galleries or designated areas, a constant reminder of their inferior position in society. Schools, hospitals, public spaces, everything was divided by color, reinforcing the social barriers and racial hierarchy that permeated every aspect of life in Charleston. It was a society that celebrated beauty, faith, and tradition, yet maintained rigid and inhumane barriers between its own citizens, a glaring contradiction that defined the essence of the South. How did this segregation shape the experience of life in Charleston, both for the privileged who enforced it and for the oppressed who suffered it? What were the hopes and fears of free blacks and enslaved people who observed the city's political effervescence, knowing that any change, whatever it might be, could mean everything or nothing for them, freedom or even greater oppression? And how would the war, by challenging these deeply rooted structures and questioning the very foundation of Southern society, force the city to confront its own contradictions and, perhaps, redefine its identity in a painful, necessary way? Education, though valued as a pillar of civilization, also reflected the profound divisions of society. Schools for the white elite offered a classical and refined education, preparing young people to lead society, manage plantations, and defend their ideals. For black people, formal education was often denied or severely restricted by law, seen as a threat to the established order and social control. However, the pursuit of knowledge persisted in secret, with clandestine classes and the oral transmission of knowledge, a silent and courageous act of resistance against oppression. The local press, in turn, was a mirror of the era's mentality, publishing articles that fervently defended secession and the institution of slavery, shaping public opinion and further inflaming sentiments against the North, creating an environment of polarization and ideological fervor. Charleston's streets were more than mere paths, they were stages of life, of encounters, and of latent tensions. We see street vendors, with their calls and wares, adding color and sound to daily life, offering everything from fresh fruits to small crafts. Artisans, in their workshops, producing goods ranging from fine furniture and delicate jewelry to simple tools and clothing. Confederate soldiers, already on patrol, in their newly sewn uniforms, displaying a martial pride that foreshadowed the imminent conflict, their boots echoing the cobblestones. The city was a living organism, pulsating with the energy of its inhabitants, but also carrying the weight of its divisions, its injustices, and the premonition of an uncertain future, a future that seemed increasingly grim. Can you feel the atmosphere, Fernando? That mixture of pride and anxiety that hung over Charleston in 1860? The beauty of the mansions, the smell of the sea, the bustle of the harbor, all enveloped in a growing tension, like a rope stretched to its maximum, about to snap at any moment. It was a city that saw itself as the guardian of a civilization, of a way of life it considered sacred and non-negotiable, but which was about to be tested in a way no one could imagine, a trial by fire that would change its essence forever. Life in Charleston, in its complexity and contradictions, was a testament to America at a turning point, a moment when past and future would collide with devastating force, leaving a trail of destruction and a legacy of transformation. And if you are immersed in this story, if every detail transports you to that time, if every word makes you feel the tension and beauty of that moment, don't forget to click the subscribe button and activate the bell. That way, you'll be the first to know when we embark on our next journey through time, exploring the most crucial moments and fascinating cities in history, and witnessing how these events shape the world we live in. Your participation is what drives us to continue unraveling these mysteries of the past and bringing these stories to life. The tension in Charleston was palpable, a dense fog hanging over the city, heavier than the Atlantic humidity. The city, proud of its history, its autonomy, and its Southern identity, viewed the election of Abraham Lincoln as a direct and existential threat. For the citizens of Charleston, Lincoln was not just a president from a rival party, he was the personification of an abolitionist ideology that, they believed, would destroy their way of life, their economy, and, fundamentally, the institution of slavery, which they considered a right and a pillar of their society. Political rhetoric intensified daily, debates in the streets and salons echoed the imminence of a rupture, and the word secession ceased to be a murmur to become a battle cry. South Carolina, driven by this fervor and led by Charleston's most influential politicians and thinkers, was the first state to declare its secession from the Union on December 20, 1860. It was not a decision made in secret, but an audacious act of defiance, celebrated with great pomp and fireworks in the city streets, as if it were a declaration of independence of a new nation. People gathered in the squares, church bells rang in jubilation, and the South Carolina flag was proudly hoisted, while the Union flag was burned in symbolic acts of repudiation. The feeling was one of liberation, that finally the South could go its own way, free from Northern interference. Can you imagine the euphoria and determination that filled the air that day, Fernando? The unwavering belief that they were doing the right thing, even if it meant tearing the country apart? And how did this decision, made with such conviction and celebration, reverberate throughout the country, lighting the fuse of a bomb that would soon explode, dragging millions into conflict and an uncertain fate? But secession was not just a declaration, it demanded action, and military action. And the most visible and provocative symbol of federal authority on Southern soil was Fort Sumter, strategically located in Charleston Harbor. For the secessionists, the presence of Union troops in their newly declared independent port was an unacceptable affront to their sovereignty, an open wound to their pride. For the Union, on the other hand, it was a vital outpost, an irreducible symbol that the country was still united, despite declarations of secession. The situation was a powder keg, and Charleston, with its cannons aimed at the fort, held the match. The bay, once a stage for commerce and beauty, transformed into a military chessboard, where every move was calculated and fraught with consequences. The days following secession were marked by intense negotiation and relentless military escalation. Major Robert Anderson, commander of Union forces at Fort Sumter, faced immense pressure. His supplies were limited, and the city of Charleston, now under Confederate control, was rapidly arming itself. Cannon batteries were installed in all strategic positions around the bay, their dark muzzles pointed directly at the fort, a silent but constant threat. With each passing day, the hope of a peaceful solution dwindled, replaced by a grim and inevitable certainty. The population watched, knowing that the first shot would ignite a conflict of unimaginable proportions. How did the tension build, Fernando, in those final hours before the attack? What were the last desperate messages exchanged, the final pleas for peace that went unheard? And how did the sheer weight of political will and military readiness push both sides towards a confrontation that neither truly desired, but both felt compelled to engage in? Then, on April 12, 1861, at 4:30 a.m., the first shot was fired. From a Confederate battery on James Island, a mortar shell arced through the pre-dawn sky, exploding over Fort Sumter. It was not just a shot, it was the thunderclap that announced the beginning of the American Civil War. The bombardment that followed was relentless. For 34 hours, Confederate cannons pounded the fort, unleashing a barrage of fire and iron. The Union defenders, outnumbered and outgunned, returned fire, but their efforts were largely symbolic. The fort's walls, once formidable, began to crumble under the sustained assault. The air was thick with smoke, the roar of cannons echoed across the bay, and the flashes of explosions illuminated the dark sky, turning night into a terrifying spectacle. Before your eyes, you can almost see the chaos and destruction. The fort, once a symbol of federal power, became a burning inferno, its flag, though still flying, battered and torn. The men inside, exhausted and without hope of reinforcement, fought bravely, but their situation was untenable. On April 13, 1861, Major Anderson, recognizing the futility of further resistance, surrendered Fort Sumter. It was a victory for the Confederacy, a moment of triumph for Charleston, celebrated with renewed fervor and pride. But it was a victory that came at an immense cost, for it solidified the division of the nation and plunged it into a war that would redefine its very existence. Can you feel the mix of exhilaration and dread that must have swept through Charleston as the news of the surrender spread? The joy of victory, tempered by the chilling realization that this was just the beginning, that the true horror of war was yet to unfold? And how did this single event, the firing on Fort Sumter, irrevocably change the course of American history, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable destruction and suffering across the entire nation? The immediate aftermath of Fort Sumter was a surge of patriotism and mobilization in Charleston. Men eagerly enlisted in the Confederate Army, convinced that the war would be short and glorious. Women organized aid societies, sewing uniforms and preparing supplies for the troops. The city transformed into a military hub, with soldiers marching through the streets, training exercises taking place in public squares, and the sounds of war preparations replacing the hum of commerce. The initial euphoria, however, soon gave way to the harsh realities of conflict. The Union, enraged by the attack on its fort, declared a naval blockade of southern ports, including Charleston. The once bustling harbor, a symbol of the city's prosperity, began to feel the stranglehold of the blockade. Ships that once brought wealth now struggled to evade enemy surveillance, and the flow of goods dwindled dramatically. The city's economy, so dependent on trade and cotton, began to stagnate, and the prosperity that seemed unshakable began to crumble. Store shelves emptied, prices soared, and scarcity became a daily reality for all inhabitants, rich and poor. The city, which once concerned itself with balls and soirees, now turned to defense. Fortifications were hastily erected, cannon batteries were installed along the coast and at strategic points in the bay, and the civilian population began to prepare for what was to come. Fear and uncertainty replaced confidence and opulence. Wealthy families, who once enjoyed their privileges and comforts, now faced scarcity, the constant threat of attack, and the real possibility of losing everything they owned. Life became a matter of survival, of adapting to a new and brutal reality. The lives of enslaved people in Charleston were also profoundly affected. Although the war was fought in part to preserve slavery, the conflict brought with it the promise, however distant, of freedom. Many enslaved people took advantage of the chaos and the proximity of Union forces to flee, seeking liberty and the opportunity to fight for it. Charleston's social structure, based on servitude, began to crack under the pressure of war, and the hope of a different future began to emerge in the hearts of those who suffered most. Escapes became more frequent, and masters' vigilance intensified, creating an even greater climate of distrust and tension. Charleston became a priority target for the Union. Its strategic importance as a port and its role as the cradle of secession made it a symbol to be conquered, a point to be silenced. Naval bombardments began, initially sporadic, but then intensified into a constant and devastating threat. The city that was once a postcard of beauty now found itself under enemy fire, with its historic buildings damaged, its streets becoming dangerous, and daily life transforming into an act of survival. Families took refuge in dark, damp basements, the sounds of explosions became part of the routine, and the urban landscape began to transform into ruins. The immediate legacy of the start of the Civil War in Charleston was the transformation of a prosperous and proud city into a besieged fortress, a city at war with itself and with the rest of the nation. The beauty and opulence of 1860 were replaced by tension, scarcity, and imminent destruction. The city that fired the first shot would be one of those that suffered most from the consequences of the war, becoming a testament to the brutality of the conflict and the resilience of its people. Can you feel the weight of this transformation, Fernando? The pain of seeing your city, your home, torn apart by a conflict you yourself helped to start? And how would this experience shape Charleston's identity for future generations, leaving scars that would be visible for decades, perhaps centuries? Charleston in 1860 was a microcosm of pre-Civil War America, a nation of beauty and contradictions, on the brink of a painful transformation. The story of its destruction and reconstruction is a powerful reminder of the cost of division and the human capacity to rise, even from the deepest devastation. If you are immersed in this narrative, if the story of Charleston captivates you and makes you reflect, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell so you don't miss part 4, where we will explore the complete destruction of the city and the first steps of its incredible reconstruction. Your journey through history is just beginning. With the first shot at Fort Sumter, Charleston's fate was sealed. The city, which had ignited the flame of the Civil War, became a priority target for Union forces, a symbol to be conquered and silenced. Days of opulence and carefree living gave way to a brutal reality of continuous siege and bombardment. The bay, once a vibrant port, transformed into a battlefield, with Union ships imposing a strict naval blockade, strangling trade and isolating Charleston from the outside world. The flow of cotton, which was the lifeblood of the local economy, almost completely ceased, and the scarcity of essential goods became a painful constant for all inhabitants. Union naval bombardments began sporadically but soon intensified, becoming a daily and devastating threat. Union cannon batteries, positioned on islands and ships around the bay, launched projectiles over the city, day and night. The sound of explosions became the soundtrack of life in Charleston. The elegant homes, historic buildings, imposing churches, everything was under enemy fire. Families took refuge in dark, damp basements, hoping the next projectile wouldn't hit their home. The streets, once full of life, were now dangerous, with debris and craters opened by explosions. The urban landscape, which was once a postcard of colonial beauty, began to transform into ruins, a silent testament to the fury of war. Can you imagine the terror of living under constant bombardment, Fernando? The uncertainty of each dawn, the pain of seeing your city, your home, torn apart piece by piece? And how would this experience shape Charleston's identity for future generations, leaving scars that would be visible for decades, perhaps centuries, both in the architecture and in the soul of its people? Daily life in Charleston became an act of pure survival. The scarcity of food and medical supplies was severe. Stores were empty, prices for the few available goods skyrocketed, and hunger became a reality for many. Improvised hospitals were overcrowded with wounded soldiers and civilians hit by the bombardments. The city, once a center of refinement, was now a place of deprivation and suffering. Women took on previously unthinkable roles, working in hospitals, ammunition factories, and in the city's defense, while men were on the front lines. The resilience of the people of Charleston was tested to its limit, but the determination to resist and protect their home remained unwavering, even in the face of adversity. Despite fierce resistance, Charleston's fall was inevitable. After years of siege and bombardment, with the Confederacy collapsing on other fronts, Confederate forces finally evacuated the city on February 17, 1865. The retreat was chaotic and desperate. To prevent valuable supplies from falling into Union hands, the Confederates themselves set fire to cotton warehouses and other depots. The fire spread uncontrollably, consuming vast areas of the city, including many of the oldest and most historic neighborhoods. The sight of Charleston in flames, covered in smoke and destruction, was a tragic end to its role as the cradle of secession. Can you visualize the magnitude of that destruction, Fernando? The elegant city, once so proud, reduced to a burning inferno, a symbol of the war's ultimate cost. And how did this final act of self-destruction underscore the desperation and despair of a cause that was now definitively lost? The entry of Union troops into Charleston on February 18, 1865, marked a pivotal moment. For the enslaved population, it meant freedom. Thousands of African Americans, who had endured generations of bondage, now celebrated their liberation with an overwhelming sense of joy and hope. The streets, once silent under the weight of oppression, now echoed with songs of freedom and cries of jubilation. It was a moment of profound transformation, not just for the individuals, but for the very fabric of the city's society. For the white population, however, it was a moment of bitter defeat, humiliation, and the beginning of an uncertain future. The city, once the proud capital of the Confederacy, was now occupied territory, its institutions dismantled, its economy shattered, and its social order irrevocably altered. The period of Reconstruction that followed was arduous and complex. Charleston, like much of the South, faced the immense challenge of rebuilding not just physical infrastructure, but its entire society. The first steps of Reconstruction were slow and painful. Labor was scarce, resources were limited, and social tensions were still very much present. The city needed to reinvent itself, find new ways to sustain its economy, and integrate a new population of free citizens. The freedmen, now with their newly won freedom, faced their own challenges: the search for work, housing, education, and the recognition of their civil rights in a society that still struggled to accept them as equals. Schools for freedmen were established, often with the support of Northern missionaries, and the African American community began to build its own institutions, seeking autonomy and dignity. The physical reconstruction of the city was a gradual process. Many of the historic buildings were repaired and restored, preserving Charleston's unique architecture, but the scars of war remained visible for decades. New businesses began to emerge, and the city slowly began to adapt to a new economic reality, less dependent on cotton and slavery. The port, though it never fully regained its former glory as a center of slave trade, began to reactivate with new types of goods and industries. The city became a symbol of the South's struggle to rise again, a testament to the human capacity to overcome adversity and to rebuild, even after the most complete devastation. The legacy of the Civil War and Reconstruction in Charleston is complex and multifaceted. The city would never be the same. Racial and social division persisted for a long time, but the war had broken the chains of slavery, paving the way for a new era, albeit one full of challenges. Charleston became a monument to resilience, a place where the story of destruction and rebirth is told in every street, in every restored building. The beauty of the city, which so enchanted us in 1860, was rebuilt, but with the scars of a war that marked it forever. Can you see today's Charleston, Fernando, and imagine the city in ruins, and then, the city rising again, brick by brick, with the strength of its people? How does this story of destruction and reconstruction teach us about the human capacity for overcoming and the importance of learning from the mistakes of the past to build a more just future? Charleston, the cradle of the storm, emerged from the Civil War as a transformed city, a living testament to the cost of division and the power of unity, the pain, loss, and the hope of rebirth. Its story is a powerful reminder that, even in the deepest ruins, the seed of reconstruction and hope can flourish. If you have been captivated by this journey through Charleston's history, if every moment has made you feel the depth and complexity of this period, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell so you don't miss any of our next journeys through time, where we will continue to unravel the mysteries and transformations of American cities and the world. Your participation is what inspires us to bring these stories to life. And tell me in the comments, which aspect of Charleston's destruction or reconstruction impacted you most? What other cities would you like to see in our next videos, exploring their stories of war and rebirth? Your opinion is fundamental to us.